What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we have a very important one. This is big name players that we should be avoiding. Whenever it comes to players that have name value, they've been proven performers throughout their career, even if their situations heading into the season are less than ideal, their ADP, it usually doesn't fully reflect that. These are also the types of players that don't really fall past their ADP. Usually people end up reaching on them for one reason or another. So one of the biggest advantages we can have on draft day is to see through the names, see through past production, and pay for what we can expect this season. Before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which quarterback has led the league in rushing touchdowns since 2016. The correct answer was Dak Prescott. He had 6 rushing touchdowns in each of his first 3 seasons, followed that up with 3 in 2019. Definitely what we want to see for fantasy. Congratulations to Sops11, you got this one right. As for today's question, in the final 8 games of the season, C-Mac, Lamar Jackson, and Michael Thomas led the league in fantasy points. Which player ranked 4th right behind them through that span? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Also, guys, the NFL season starts in just over 2 weeks. That means our fantasy drafts are right around the corner. If you want to be fully prepared, consider signing up for our draft package. We have player breakdowns on all draftable players. You'll have access to our tier-based rankings, our sleepers, our targets, our busts. We even have consistency charts, offensive line rankings, risk ratings, and more. So if that's something that interests you, consider signing up for our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link, as always, in the description box below. With that out of the way though, let's hop right into the video. The first player we have is Zach Ertz of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, he was on this same list last season when we said he was a big name player to avoid, and it still stands true for 2020 because, guys, we were right. Through the first 8 games, Zach Ertz only scored 8.4 fantasy points per game. That hardly ranks inside the top 12 at the tight end position, and for this season is unlikely to rank in the top 12 because we have a lot of prospects that could potentially outperform that. Only once the receivers on this team were led by Greg Ward and JJ Arcega-Whiteside did Zach Ertz even compile some respectable fantasy performances. Now, heading into this season, I understand that Alshon Jeffrey is not going to start the season, likely to start on the PUP, and Deshaun Jackson, we can't guarantee how many games he is going to play either, but they do have Jalen Reagor. Dallas Goedert, his role is going to continue to expand, so Zach Ertz's involvement and target market share is much more likely to mirror what we saw towards the first half of 2019 as opposed to what we saw towards the tail end. One thing that nobody is talking about is the contract extension for Ertz. Now, we've talked several times throughout this offseason about finding players who are financially motivated to perform. Players on 1-year deals or their contract is set to expire at the end of the season, they are going to have much more motivation to stay on the field, remain healthy, perform at their peaks, because their career, their next contract is going to heavily rely on that. Zach Ertz, he is one of these players. The Philadelphia Eagles do have an out at the end of this season and had the potential to extend him this offseason but couldn't get a deal done. Guys, that has to raise some red flags. Both Kittle and Kelsey did sign deals. Zach Ertz, on the other hand, was unable to get a deal done, and it's interesting that the Philadelphia Eagles were reluctant to write him a check, somebody who has been a consistent playmaker for their team, because there's only one tight end that actually has competition behind him, and it's not like the Eagles are strapped for cap either. They currently rank 11th in cap space, well ahead of both Kansas City as well as San Francisco. So if they were expecting Zach Ertz to have a career year after coming off of a down season, this front office would be smart to pay him right now as opposed to wait until the end of the year. Now, the way I see it, based on what Zach Ertz has said, is that this team can comfortably move away from Zach Ertz at the end of the season, insert Dallas Goedert into his similar role, and ultimately save some money. Now, the Eagles front office, it is one of the better front offices in the entire league, so we can't put it past them. And while typically I look for contracts as a way to find motivation in players, Zach Ertz, he's not that type of guy. We know while he's on the field, he's giving it everything he can. He doesn't miss games. He's not injury prone. He's basically everything you could ask for from a tight end, which implies that much more that the Philadelphia Eagles are going to try to see what they got in Goedert for the potential move away from Ertz in favor of a cheaper option. option. So when you factor in that Zach Ertz was virtually unstartable when this team had actual passing weapons outside of Greg Ward and Whiteside, which they presumably will have for the entire season even if Deshaun Jackson gets hurt, Alshon Jeffrey will eventually return, and with Jalen Reagor poised to be the focal point of this offense from the receiver position, along with the team's motivation to get Dallas Goedert that much more involved, to me, he has no place being drafted as the third tight end off the board. But you know, when it comes to name value, many people in your league will even opt to draft him over players like Mark Andrews, one of the highest upside tight ends in the entire league. So for that, we likely will have 0 shares of Ertz this season, and we're completely fine with it. We're moving over to a quarterback, and it easily has to be Aaron Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers, he just has 0 upside for 2020. It has nothing to do with his individual ability. I still think he has one of the best arm talents in the entire league, but ultimately we feel he is going to be held back by the lack of overall weapons that this offense has. And from what we have seen from him as of late, the past few seasons, we haven't seen that upside that we used to see in Aaron Rodgers when it comes to his extreme touchdown efficiency. We do still get some rushing yardage, which helps add to his floor, but a consistent ceiling is just something we have not got from Rodgers for several seasons now. I want it to be clear that I said consistent ceilings. We know that he still has it. I'm not denying that. He did post the best single week fantasy performance of any quarterback in the league, and that was even considering that Lamar Jackson completely popped off in every game he started. Now, Aaron Rodgers, even with that performance, was still only able to finish as the QB 14 in fantasy points per game, which means you were better off streaming the position than just starting Aaron Rodgers every week. If you actually take out that massive performance, his fantasy points per game were terrible. In fact, his fantasy points per game in his 15 other contests would have been good for a quarterback 21 finish. The only legitimate reasoning for having him potentially improving on those numbers from last season has to come down to him having a chip on his shoulder. In the draft, they did not draft any offensive weapons for him that would help him in the pass game. In fact, they did the complete opposite. They drafted a running back with reasonable draft capital. They also invested heavily into a quarterback, which has you wondering, is this the ultimate replacement for Aaron Rodgers? Now, that is a reason for a potential chip on his shoulder, a reason for him to potentially play better, and I do think that will help him improve on his numbers and his efficiency heading into 2020 when compared to 2019, but that simply is not enough to constitute where he's going in drafts when you compare it to what he was able to do in 2019. Even if he improves in certain areas, we do think Davante Adams is hands down one of the better picks you can make in the entire draft, but that's because they simply have no other weapons outside of him. In order for Rodgers to be a top 5 quarterback, Davante Adams is legitimately going to have a Christian McCaffrey type season at the wide receiver position. Currently, Aaron Rodgers is being drafted at the lowest position you've been able to get him over the past decade, which is the quarterback 11, which is still several spots higher than we have him ranked. There's just no upside in the pick, and you know people in your league are going to draft Rodgers based off of his production in years past, but when you don't have enough weapons, there's only so much a quarterback can do. We saw it last season. He finished as the QB 14 in fantasy points per game, but like I said, in 15 of his 16 games, he was performing outside of the top 20. Guys, the final player we have is Keenan Allen of the LA Chargers. This is actually a player that I have never understood the hype around. I know some analysts in the industry, they have him as a player to target, and I can kind of understand it, but at the same time, I see absolutely no ceiling, and his floor, while it has been high, while he's been peppered with targets by Phillip Rivers, it is much lower heading into 2020. The biggest argument I have heard for him is that he is the number 1 option in his offense from a receiver position. I'm not denying that. I don't even think there will be a player like Austin Eckler or Mike Williams or Hunter Henry who is going to be a potential threat to dethrone him as the target leader. The overall passing volume in an offense led by Tyrod Taylor, though, it presents absolutely 0 upside, and for a player that requires a high amount of targets to be uber productive like Keenan Allen has been, it's going to have a major impact on his production. Tyrod Taylor, he's a game manager. I know a lot of people see him as a mobile quarterback, which brings a stigma of somebody who can scramble, always looking for the pass downfield like Russell Russell Wilson does. No, Tyrod Taylor, he plays much more like an Alex Smith back in his days in Kansas City when he finished a season without a single passing touchdown to a wide receiver. He doesn't take chances. You won't see him opting to throw the 50-50 ball deep downfield. There won't be shootouts while he is the starter of this team. And the reason the Chargers opted to bring him in was for that very same reason. Phillip Rivers, he threw games away. He lost the Chargers game single-handedly, and they want somebody on the team who can distribute the ball to the playmakers without making those costly mistakes that cost them down the stretch. We cannot overstate exactly how reliant Keenan Allen is on volume. In 2019, he ranked 50th in fantasy points per target, and for those of you who may say that that was due to Phillip Rivers having a down year, yes, he did have a down year, and Keenan Allen did show some regression in that area, but we're only talking about 0.06 fantasy points per target. So yes, historically, this has been an area where he has struggled in. Now he is on an offense that is destined for lower volume. In fact, Keenan Allen's production is so volume based that even losing 15 or even possibly 20% when it comes to his targets would actually bring him outside the top 30 wide receivers in fantasy points per game. And that's already assuming that the connection and efficiency between him and Tyrod is exactly what we have seen from him and Rivers in seasons past. Now he is coming off the board as a wide receiver 22, which for most people it seems like a value, but when you're talking about a player who has an extremely low ceiling in this offense and the floor and the safety that we have become accustomed to, it's in no way guaranteed. This is exactly the type of player I'm avoiding on draft day, hoping some of my league mates do end up drafting him, because there are a ton of great receivers that are being drafted in this range. DJ Chark, Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf, all players that are being drafted at or behind him that have a realistic path to finishing as a wide receiver 1 in 2020. Keenan Allen, in order to do so, we would have to see something from Tyrod Taylor we have never seen before. I'm not betting on Tyrod to just come out and do something spectacular, so for me, I'm avoiding him, and I recommend you do as well. But guys, that's gonna do it for this video. We really hope you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.